One of the weirdest problems with the recent release of the game Battlefield 5 is the sheer amount of reviews in which the game isn't even reviewed. Tons of videos were made about the pre-release trailers, the political opinions of the developers, the botched PR events, the dismissive attitudes of the developers towards any feedback. But what does that have to do with the game itself? How it plays, its mechanics, its features, and if it's fun. When I played the game, there is something that stood out to me that nobody else seemed to have noticed, or at the very least pointed out. The issues that people are angry about in Battlefield 5 are literally the same that people are angry about in Battlefield 1. The games are remarkably similar in many different gameplay and design choices, but when you look at the reactions, which go into two completely different directions, I just can't help but scratch my head in confusion. The bombastic scene change from 10 years of modern warfare shooters into the never-before depicted scenario of the First World War, the novelty of that scenario, how different it all was, that just seemed to be enough to silence critics. What this shows to me is that in the end it is really mostly all about presentation, not substance itself. The same people screaming over an unhistoric female character in a Battlefield 5 campaign don't bat an eyelid at the even more ridiculously depicted character in a Battlefield 1 campaign. The game in itself, just like Battlefield 1, is not as much a disaster as it is a set of failed opportunities, and the overwhelmingly negative reaction to the game is in my opinion misguided. The game is a step into the right direction, and because of that, this video here is the beginning of a series on videos in which I intend to defend Battlefield 5, the game, and the directions that the developers decided to go into. Let's get something right out of the way at the start. Why should anyone care about the political opinions of game developers? What is the point of obsessively searching through political messages that they placed into their creative work? If that was the in and all of it, then the same amount of anger should just as well be directed at developers who might leave hints of their beliefs in their games. Additionally, does it really matter? Borderlands 2 is one of the best games out there, and if you ever bothered looking at its developers, you will have noticed that they are some of the most obnoxious social justice warriors on Twitter. In the end, their opinions, however, don't matter as much as the quality of the games that they produced. So what about the game? Well, most criticisms revolve around historical accuracy, most of those around two campaigns in the game. The woman you inaccurately fight as in a Norwegian commander mission that was actually done by men. The Free French campaign as a Senegalese colonial soldier and the supposedly overblown racism depicted. The women shown in the trailer fighting with prosthetic arms, and people also pointed at American helmets on British paratroopers. The problem I have with these criticisms is, why stop there? British paratroopers didn't even exist in 1940. Sten guns didn't exist in 1940. Tiger tanks didn't exist in 1941. The British didn't do daylight bombing raids after 1940. Bristol Blenheim bombers were not used for big bombing raids after 1940. German soldiers didn't have shotguns. The last Tiger tank actually fought in the Battle of Berlin. Commandos in Norway didn't kill a single German soldier. The Calliope rocket launcher was a long-range artillery weapon, not close-range. V-1 rockets were not accurate precision weapons. This is a black soldier who is wearing a Waffen-SS coat. The Sturmtiger took 20 minutes to reload. And how do you repair plane mid-flight? And hey, why stop at Battlefield 5? Why can you carry a water-cooled machine gun in Battlefield 1? Why is there a BAR in World War I? No, you can't just get away with stealing an RAF plane. German fighter planes didn't have enough fuel capacity to fly to Britain. Look at how many German planes you shoot down in this campaign. How the hell wasn't the Luftwaffe wiped out? And look at all these prototype weapons that just happen to conveniently be everywhere around you. And why remain in this series? Look at this, a Tiger tank rolling up a mountain, the armored train, the Soviet weapons in German hands. The US Army was segregated. Time doesn't slow down when you look through the scope of a sniper rifle. How can you reload a scoped rifle with a stripper clip? This reload animation right here, this is like one of these drawings by MC Escher. There's a difference between aesthetics, mechanics, and setting. You could make many a detailed video criticizing games by detailing how heavy machine guns can't be shot through their sights while standing, on the functionality of weapons under certain conditions, and the representations thereof in a game. The question, however, is, how much would that be in conflict with the game itself? Not in terms of its accuracy, but in terms of its playability. A heavy water-cooled machine gun requires a tripod to be fired. Would it be practical in a first-person shooter to have the character carry around the tripod and having to set it up in firing position before being able to shoot? In the first Call of Duty games, this was actually the case with light machine guns. You couldn't just pick them up and shoot your way through the game. You had to find cover or lie down and set up a firing position before shooting. Picking up a machine gun in early first-person shooters meant that more than even today you had to take into account the different functionalities of the gun. Small details like these will pop up for many who play games and happen to know something about firearms. A feature introduced by Far Cry 2 and Fallout 3 was a wear and tear for guns. Weapons could break due to overuse. Some back then even hoped for jamming mechanics that could disable firearms in mud and dirt for future games. However, the feature disappeared in subsequent titles and has not returned. The additional functions and features, as interesting as they may be seen, go against the ethos of a first-person shooter, which is quick, fast-paced action at the meshing of a button. We often like to assert that we prefer small details and features in shape of little interactions in games, additional small tasks that further immerse us into the experience. The truth is that the extent to which such can be implemented is limited by ourselves to the extent that we actually would enjoy them. A novel feature introduced in Battlefield 1 was the Behemoth system in multiplayer, in which one team is given use of a gigantic weapon of game-winning potential. A dreadnought, a zeppelin, an armored train, or a heavy tank. The opposing team actually is required to work in a team effort to destroy that game-winning weapon. Additionally, the team in possession of the Behemoth and its weapons is required to work as a team. In previous Battlefield games, operating a vehicle meant you took over control of all aspects of the vehicle. You were both the tank driver, commander, and gunner. The Behemoth system divided these roles up amongst the players, who then had to work together. A neat idea for a new feature, certainly exciting to some, but players ended up complaining so much about the Behemoth system that it was eventually scrapped. A return to the old style of vehicle control happened in Battlefield 5, where you controlled the entirety of the vehicle again. There's a game that goes into the extreme with small realistic features like that. Postscriptum. It has a heavy emphasis on unit cohesion, realism, and a really steep learning curve. A challenging game where when you play it, one of the first lessons the game teaches you is that you will not succeed as an individual, but only by working together with other players on your team. If you want to use a tank in this game, you have to set up a team of 4 players. A commander, a driver, a gunner, and a machine gunner. All of them do as their role requires them to do. The action is in its entirety team-based. Without the commander, the tank is largely blind. Without the driver, the tank can't move. Without the gunner, the tank can't fire its main gun. Without the machine gunner, the tank is vulnerable to infantry. It's a neat setup and exciting to play. However, would this work in a fast-action Battlefield series game? A neat little feature in Postscriptum is that you have to choose which ammunition type you load into the main gun, high explosive against soft targets or armor piercing against hard targets. What is easily forgotten about this feature of differing ammunition mission types is that this previously existed in another Battlefield game. It was removed over the course of recent years, presumably because players didn't like this feature. A new feature added into Battlefield 5 are limited ammunitions for vehicles. It is now possible for your tank to run out of ammunition and having to return to base to stock up on ammunition. And this feature, like many other additions, will be in all likelihood removed in the future games, because players like streamlined, quick-based actions where they don't have to think and engage that much other than mashing a button to fire. The best examples as for why features keep appearing and disappearing is Battlefield's main competitor, the Call of Duty series, with which its latest title decided to do away with the campaign in general and be an exclusively multiplayer-based game. Multiplayer has come to dominate the first-person shooter market, and the fast-paced and quick skirmishes that occur on multiplayer maps have come to determine how games are designed in general. This was not helped by the fact that for the previous 10 years the market was dominated by shooters set in futuristic and modern settings that are more fast-paced than the sluggish combat of the Second and First World Wars. What has in recent years been the most detrimental to first-person shooters has in a way been their own success, and that success didn't come with campaigns but with multiplayer. The first Call of Duty game had 4 times as many missions than the last Call of Duty game. Battlefield used to have hours upon hours of campaign missions for you to play through, and multiplayer maps were basic and few in number. From the multitude of prototype weapons to the hit indicator, from simplified vehicle controls to the simplistic button mashing, from grenade warnings to being able to repair a plane mid-flight, this is not the result of campaign-specific choices but to streamline the game to make it easier and quicker and faster for multiplayer. And this is really where the problem with recent first-person shooters, but specifically with the recent Battlefield game, arise. There is conflict between multiplayer and single-player. The mechanics of first-person shooters used to be set more in favor of single-player campaign playstyles, where being able to choose from various different ways to achieve a goal resonated positively with players. Multiplayer in those days also favored these long, drawn-out mechanics due to the setting of the game in the Second World War. Modern shooters set in modern combat with their emphasis on quick playstyles and button mashing guided the developers into introducing mechanics that favored multiplayer at the cost of campaign gameplay. It is also the game's aesthetics that suffered under the success of multiplayer. The biggest backlash over the game came before its release, when those in anticipation were presented with a somewhat confusing trailer. The trailer depicted various different weapons and features that really didn't make that much sense. Women in frontline service of the Western Allies fighting with prosthetic limbs, black soldiers in Waffen-SS gear, katanas, teddy bears tied to tanks, and V1 rockets used like modern precision airstrikes. Was this a steampunk game? Was Battlefield developing an Inglourious Basterds style type of game? Or was this just pure social justice insanity, as some may have claimed? The answer lies in multiplayer, more specifically with the players themselves. The playstyle of modern first-person shooters emphasizes individual skill over teamwork. The rejection of systems such as BMOF systems shows that. Players interact as individuals and also want to have that individuality expressed. The presence of hundreds of different weapons, weapon skins, and customizable weapon parts show this just as much as the plethora of different gear you can equip your character with. All of these barely have any function in the game itself. Goggles were given to soldiers to prevent their sight from being impeded by dust clouds, but dust clouds don't inhibit your sight in the game. Ammunition pouches don't actually increase your ammunition carrying capacity. Specialized armors don't increase your armor in any way. The addition of these is therefore purely cosmetic. It is to give the player a way to express individuality in the game. However, adding these features into the game and changing the aesthetic to appease the individuality of the players, that creates a weird mix of different styles and mixed up uniform parts and weapons that don't really make much sense in the setting itself. The inclusion of customizable female characters in the game is where the conflicting interests of multiplayer and game setting came to crash into each other at a high speed. They are not as much an expression of political program as the result of an evolution of multiplayer gaming towards allowing the player to be able to express and represent themselves as individuals inside the game. However, a military is by its very nature antithetical to the notion of individuality. Representing a military structure in a game while allowing players an extent of expressing individuality will down the road lead to instances in which these liberties interfere with the setting the game is based on. Besides the female characters, gold-plated machine guns and other such features also testify to such. But on the other hand, nobody plays Team Deathmatch as a coherent team where players work together to achieve a goal or victory. The playstyle in modern first-person multiplayer matches is fast-paced and quick action orientated upon individual effort. When people watched the pre-release trailer of Battlefield 5, the main anger of it revolved around the supposed pushing by the developers of a leftist political agenda. However, the case is to be made that the mess you see here is not the result of any such agenda, but the result of preferences by players who have dominated the first-person shooter market. Quick, fast-paced multiplayer matches are where the money lies in this market. Making the game marketable to an as big audience as possible, that is as broad as possible, is needed to continue the success of such games. And by trying to reach out to as wide a market as possible for multiplayer, the developers neglected that a core consumer base would react dissatisfied or even hostile to such. There are solutions to this problem. It's to either abandon campaigns completely and focus on multiplayer action, or to focus on campaign completely while ignoring multiplayer. Or potentially risky, abandoning the features adopted during games set in modern warfare settings, remove hit indicators, precision airstrikes, the simplified vehicle controls, and many other similar features. What caused the mess we find in Battlefield 5 is not to be placed on some hidden political agenda, but on the developments in multiplayer that took place over the course of the last 10 years.